Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren Folge Witch on the Holy Night. Das letzte Mal sind ja die beiden aufeinander getroffen. Ich habe gerade den Namen von beiden vergessen. Egal. Ja. Ich weiß aber noch, dass er aus dem Fenster springen wollte, weil er zu seiner Arbeit muss. Und sie das allgemein sehr angepisst von ihm war. Aber hey, the sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The grey sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro und Aoko, ja stimmt, Aoko Aosaki war das, glaube ich, were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Aoko stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock. He was right about the time. Oh. She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in uniform running through the rain without an umbrella, a sight she must have seen before, but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Aoko did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamashiro's offer to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfied to ruin his day just as he had hers. She walked as quietly as she could towards the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home.
ま、それも悪くないか。
She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. Shrugged. Verdammt, ich krieg's einfach nicht vernünftig ausgesprochen. She neither liked or disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in hand. The teachers at Misaki High School weren't fond of bright colors, so Ako's red umbrella was an unusual sight. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure white had been making the rounds, but it featured Aoko instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she made her way toward Misaki Station. Misaki Private High School took its namesake from the town it was in. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. There were some who fought to preserve Misaki's natural treasures.
残すことには賛成ですが、それでは残すだけになってしまうでしょう。
With those words, the major snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long-term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the urban development were collected. And the unassuming town of Misaki became the largest municipality of Misaki City in merry 10 years. Even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashirogi or the elegance of Misaki Hills.
それも当然よね。どういじくっても、もともとが山中の宿場町だし。山ごと切り崩すって言うんなら別だけど。
Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hills and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting the old Misaki where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town, welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location in its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was not only steep and remote. It had become an overgrown game trail with the passage of time. For some reasons, among others, Misaki High School had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago. We had received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city. And thus Misaki High School reopened its door, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The heritage rustic people of this country town preferred prefectural schools to private ones. Truth be told, Aoko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she could spend her days touring her favorite bands on her way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure. So here she was, working alone in town with only red umbrella to keep her company on what should have been a day off.
思い返してみると、私の人生ってなんか災難続きっぽい。
Her frustration evaporated into the cold December rain.
でもいっか。退屈だけはしないわけだし。
With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. The busier part of town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Misaki's train station was brand new. Once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory, it had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. When the department stores first opened, Aoko and her friends had been impressed with the modern feel, but in time the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she wanted to do was rest at a cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she frittered away her money. Okay. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment she could have sworn she had seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. Okay, das war sehr geil gemacht, finde ich. It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down your spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued her walk home, brushing off the event as if it had never happened. In time the chill faded, and all that was left was the sounds of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had all been in her head, she was far from comfortable with the feeling that still lingered.
夏場の方ってもう少しこう。
She grumbled under her breath.
波乱万丈、商売繁盛、諸行無常と。そうそう、忙しさに愚痴を言っても始まらないわ。
Unfortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Rank with grease and heat, the kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone. But one last battle remained, dinner time. Only after the evening chaos could the kitchen crew remove their right arm and call it a day. In the midst of the frozen zone was a lone newcomer.
これ着るんですか?
His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was.
気持ちはわかる。俺もどうかと思うけど、店長の言うことだから、もう笑顔で乗り越えてくれ。これも商店街の明日のためなんだとよ。本気で申し訳ないんだが、雨も止んだし、なんとか行ってきてくれないか?
His bright orange co-worker clasped his hands together as if to beg for forgiveness, as he saddled him with this unreasonable task. Muss er jetzt als Maskottchen verkleidet irgendwas machen? 10 years ago, Misaki City was a town of farm and woodland. But everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall multi-story buildings, and the residential areas were similarly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long become a thing of the past. Shiroi-Nozuka was the only place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town, a pocket of the past inside an urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago, it had been considered unwise to build on high ground, so nobody lived above a certain elevation. Shiroi-Nozuka, sitting as it did atop a hill in the middle of town, was no exception to that convention, and had no residence to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed into the cover of trees. A lone vending machine stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground and development so enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Aoko Aozaki traversed the long slope. Below her, she could see the home of Misaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from the side. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it. But unfortunately, Misaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast at the moment, the scene was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. The view was the one thing that made the arduous climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that.
雨の日は自転車も使えないし、1日に2回ぐらいバスでも通ってくれないもんかな、ほんと。
Aoko had been using this road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier.
あれ、鍵閉まったまま？アリス、まだ帰ってきてないんだ。
With a very struck, she puts hand on the rusty iron fence. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open as if to welcome her. Aber ich dachte, hat sie das jetzt aufgeschlossen oder war das jetzt was anderes, was da gerade passiert ist? Ich bin mir nämlich gerade nicht so sicher, weil da war auch so ein kurzer, was ich so als Flash bezeichnen würde, also so ein Aufleuchten. Und das Ding heißt Witch on the Holy Night. Daher, that sits atop a hill. That sits atop that hill, a haunted house. That is how the story much shared around town used to begin. But fresh rumors about those had sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being dilapidated and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murder of crows often gather atop the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog, never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular piece of slander was the one Aoko wished to discredit the most. The final rumor was of an eye-catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up and down the hill. The rumor spread and grew by the day. And while they grew, the house that everyone thought had rotten away was restored over the recent years. Deep in the wood on top of a hill, no one dared to approach. Like a ruin, shrouded from view even on the brightest of days, stood a relic out of time, a building from a fairy tale. The house. Das sieht schon cool aus. Das sieht schon nach einem sehr coolen Haus aus, finde ich. Was the Kuronji Mansion. Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. It was an unabashedly haunted house where Aoko Aozaki resided, for reasons known only to her. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Kuronji family home was a grand western-style mansion with a long and storied history. stretching all the way back to England. Das erkennt man am Baustil tatsächlich, das Englische. It was too small to be a dormitory, yet too big to be called a house. The main building contained as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms and was surrounded by a large all-encompassing courtyard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence, covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. To the town's residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of the hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors lies and slender were the prices to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here.
ま、私はともかく、アリスはそういうのやりかねないし。
She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with a little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing it open with one hand, she entered the supposedly haunted house. And by the way, if vampires were not enough to scare you, ghosts were known to appear on certain nights. Much like the weather outside, the foyer was overcast with shades of grey. Perhaps by deliberate design, the architect had chosen not to include any lights in the entrance area. The ceiling was 2 floors high. The only light in the room came from the skylight. It was particularly gloomy on rainy days. On moonless nights, it was like the world itself ceased to be. Aoko decided that the drawing room to the east would be a good place to rest, but knowing that she would not be able to relax until she changed clothes, she started up the stairs. The stairs curled up in the wall onto the 2nd floor hall. There was a 3rd floor attic as well, accessible from the far end of the hall. She had never set foot in the 2 years she had lived here, though. The Conji mansion was more or less divided into 2 wings, east and west. Aoko had been given the entire east wing, but 2 rooms were more than enough as far as she was concerned. She had no desire to open a door that would trap you in a storybook world or lead to an attic that had only been used for storage these last 5 years. Aoko's room was at the end of the east wing's long corridor. She had elected for a smaller room for no other reason other than that she thought it would be easier to clean. It was furnished with a large bed, her beloved mahogany desk, a wardrobe and chest for clothes, and 2 9-shelf bookcases. That was the extent of what she had brought from home. Her entire life of 16 years reduced to this. She had also brought the next room down for her own purposes.
そうだ。アリスにもらった見張りと壊れてないかチェックしないと。
Watchtower? She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had borne fruit. The study next door served as proof of the life she had been living for the last year, and how different that life was from the one she had lived before. It was not a room for the person she had been. It was a room for the person she would eventually become, a place of solitude that only she could enter, or so she thought.
うわ、壊れてるどころか跡形もなく消え去ってる。やっぱ自己流アレンジはまだ早かったか。いいわよ、笑いなさいよ、コマ撮り。
The noisy neighbor that had intruded upon her sanctuary flew away. While not exceptionally talented, Aoko did not lack for effort and was not afraid to fail. One could have almost mistaken her approach for optimism. Okay. Was hatte es damit zu tun jetzt? She changed out of her uniform and returned to the first floor. Down the stairs, she opened the door to the east wing in the corridor, as dark as its chiller. The absence of windows meant it was pitch black without the lights on, so she flicked the switch and entered the nearby doorway. Oh, ein Fernseher, ein alter Fernseher, sehr, sehr alt.
電気のない生活か。想像したくないな。
It had been her idea to update the drawing room. The walls were decorated with extravagant patterns, and around the room were large majestic sofas and a luxurious Persian rug. Amidst it all was a 30-inch television that seemed completely out of place. It stood looking over the other furniture like the emperor with no clothes. The mansion's owner would have rather done without it, but to a commoner like Aoko, it was an essential commodity. They had fought over its presence at first, but eventually came to an agreement and now mutually enjoyed this modern comfort.
なんだ、人のことは言えないか。うちも案外時代錯誤な家だった。
Now, in a somewhat pleasant mood, she decided to brew some tea. She boiled some water in the kitchen, prepared a teapot, and made herself some black tea. With a flop, she sank into the sofa. She took a sip of her tea, then another. Und dann ist es Nacht oder was? Lulled by the ticking of the clock, she took a third sip as she pondered how to spend her afternoon. The sofa almost seemed to be inviting her, and she sank even further into its comforting embrace. Aoko barely opened her eyes as she lifted her body up from the cushions. This was no dream or delusion. At some point a girl had sat down across from her. Not the least bit surprised, she reached for her teacup, but the tea within had gone completely cold. She asked the question to the girl on the other side of the table. The girl answered without lifting her gaze. When silent, she could have been mistaken for a beautiful doll. The girl sitting on the opposite sofa was reading an old book. She had delicate limbs and pale white skin. Not a hint of humanity emanated from her melancholic aura. She had darker hair than Aoko, and her icy eyes were focused on the pages in front of her. Her clothes resembled that of a nun, but were actually her school uniform. In Aoko's humble opinion, the gloominess suited her. She evoked something like out of a painting. There was something unreal about her, as if she were frozen in time. The white of her gently arched neck was so lovely that even Aoko found herself enchanted by it. The girl was one of the haunted house's 2 residents. Her name was Alice Kuonji, and she was the same age as Aoko. Ah, Besitzerin des Hauses offenbar. Die Kuonji Menschen.
どれくらい寝てた？1時間と少し。ここで眠ると風邪ひくわよ。
Alice answered indifferently, not that it bothered Aoko, who was now used to it. She looked at the clock on the wall and saw that it was already 7. She had been asleep for 2 hours. The day had been a rough one for her, and she had slept little the night before, so it was no surprise that she had dozed off for as long as she had.
起こしてくれてもよかったのに。せっかくの紅茶が冷めちゃったじゃない。
私が来た時はもう冷めてたわ。
でしょうね。言ってみただけよ。
Orko drank down the rest of the cold tea in one gulp. In the poorly did Koanji mentioned that was more than enough to clear her head and wake
こ
up.
うなるとフォートナム&メイソンも何もないわね。おかえりアリス。玉の贅沢もあんた抜きじゃ閉まらないってことかしら。今日は薬日か天中殺か。ちょっと早いけどお参りってのも十分ありかもね。
Orko shrugged her shoulders as she resigned herself to her fate.
それで何があったの？
After 2 years together, they knew each other quite well. Orko had one way of asking questions, and Alice had another. Alice asked without raising her head, and Orko gave her the details.
まず謝らなくちゃいけない。昨日徹夜で完成させた例のあれ、意味がなくなっちゃったのよ。ちょっと目を離した隙に沸騰しすぎて壊れちゃったみたい。そうならないよう循環のコードを 2,3 本外したり縫合したりしたんだけど。
Orko tried to laugh it off as if it was someone else's problem.
どういうこと？
今朝休養が入って学校に呼び出し受けたの。そこで転入生の世話を押し付けられて一日が無残にも消費されちゃって、帰ってきたら跡形もなく消えてました。怒る？アリス。
別に青子の器物破損にいちいち怒っていたら一生分の口論をすることになるでしょ。代用品はあるからまた一から始めればいいわ。それより怒ってるのはあなたの方じゃないの？
Yup. Alice was very much on point today. It was true that despite outward appearance, Orko was seething with frustration. That aside.
この転入生っていうのがひどくずれててね。すごい山奥で暮らしてたらしくて、こっちの常識が通じないんだから。三問以下って言葉があるけど、あれって本当のことなのね、アリス。
Alice raised her head in response to hearing her name. But Orko kept on before she could get a word in edgewise. Orko, after all, expected no sympathy in the first place.
初対面から尺に触るやつだったけど、教室を案内した時なんか失神しそうになったわ。そいつ、教室で教師と1対1で授業を受けるもんだと思ってたらしいの。それはそれでまだ流せる。許容範囲よ。で、私が簡潔かつ丁寧に教室の何たるかを教えた後で、そいつなんて言ったと思う？それで青崎、他の教室は何に使うんだ？ですって。教室に他も何もないでしょ？なんていうか、そいつは少しでも説明を怠るとそのままで納得しちゃうのよ。何も疑問に思わないというか、想像力が欠如してるっていうか、想像することに慣れてないっていうか。まあ一度言ったことはちゃんと分かってるっぽいからバカってわけじゃないんだけど。
あなたが人を批評するのは珍しいわね。そういうダメな人気にするたちだったの？
みじんたりとも気にしないわよ。けど明日からどんな間違いをしでかすのかちょっと心配なだけ。
What she was really worried about was having to clean up that mess if and when it happened. That had to be it. If not, it would mean she had no real idea why she could not get him out of his head.
とにかく変なやつなの。案外アリスと気が合うかも。
三問一回はいい言葉ね。
But from her eyes it was clear that the question of whether they would get along was irrelevant, given that they would never meet in the first place. Also irgendwie bezweifle ich, dass die sich nicht treffen werden. Orko gave a non-committal response.
ところでアリス、さっきから何読んでるの？
霊的進化論の二次創作。スピリチュアルダイアリのまがいもの。
ああ、スウェーデンボリー。そんなの今更読んでも仕方ないんじゃない？
新書なら退屈だけど、これは偽書だから。彼の欠点と長所を劇的に褒め上げている。よくできた冒険小説のようよ。立ちはだかる秘密組織の名前がカントとか気が利いているわ。筆跡はあなたのおじいさんのものだけど。
へえ、あの人そういう趣味まであったんだ。割とユーモアがあったのね。惜しい人を亡くしたわ。
Aoko seemed nostalgic over her now deceased grandfather.
あなたのおじいさん、夏に頼りをくれたけど。
よしてよ、死んだものと考えたいのに。
Aoko sat and laid back on the sofa. The soft cushions caved in under her weight.
話は戻るけど。
Alice shot a glance at Aoko. Her body buried in the sofa remained as still as a corpse. It was clear Aoko had tuned out of the conversation. Alice silently chastised him with her look. Chastised her with a look. The more she thought about it, the less important the events of the day seemed to become. If she just ignored Alice, the conversation would end there. They would eventually get up and leave today's mistake unresolved for another day. However, that's not the kind of person Aoko Awazaki was.
いいわよ。何?
She asked, still lying down.
今日できなかったのは少し痛いわね。
だから反省してるって。学校優先は一人前になってからでしょ。
ならいいけど。
The coldness in her voice made Aoko gnash her teeth. She knew what Alice wanted to say. She knew better than anyone. The veneers she wore for school was different than in the way she lived at home. While it could be called hiding in plain sight, Alice thought it was silly. And what the silence told her was,
覚悟を決めろって言いたいのよね、あんたは。
Today's failure was not a colossal one. She had just happened to upset the delicate balance between her home and school lives, chasing one at the expense of the other. And yet, the careless mistake was a clear sign of Aoko's lack of commitment.
アリスは関係ない。これは私が私で決めなくちゃいけないこと。
She had only known for sure. Ich denke, ich mache jetzt hier mal, beende hier jetzt mal die Folge. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Ciao.